welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us. And tonight we'll be speaking about gender-based violence. We're coming to the end of the 16 days of activism, which started on the 25th of November and come to an end on the 10th of December. Now, since 1991, this has been the practice started by the Global Leadership Center. Tonight in the studio, I have right next to me Sandra Nasali, who is the Program Coordinator, Knowledge Management, Advocacy and Research at ACFOD, Action for Development. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you.
That's quite a title.
Yes, it is.
Wow. And right next to her is the Executive Director for Action for Development, Ms. Regina Bafaki. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and good evening, viewers.
All right, let's say it as it is. Once again, thank you for joining us. Like I mentioned earlier, we are going to speak about gender-based violence tonight. And this particular episode is done in collaboration with Trocare. And when we speak about gender-based violence, I feel like a lot gets lost in translation. In these 16 days, so much information is given out that it's easy to forget the basics. What are we talking about exactly?
Okay, when we talk about gender-based violence, we are referring to all forms of violence that are meted on women, men, boys, and girls. It happens in different forms. It can be physical, sexual, emotional, and economical. But the reason why we put emphasis on the women is because it's the women who suffer most. When you look at the statistics, majority of the women have experienced either physical violence, sexual violence, and economical violence. So that's why we put emphasis on the women and girls.
All right, and like you rightfully put it, well, while we might say women suffer more, it means they're actually men who suffer the same as well. And again, the question always is, where are the men and why are they not invited to these conversations? And yet, well, many of them are victims, but also we know that many of them are the perpetrators. So why are they not invited in these conversations?
The reason why the men are not here, it's not that we don't work with men. We do work with them in all our programs. And today it so happened that they are not around because, unfortunately, the man whom we thought would come got an emergency and had, of course, to let us come alone. Otherwise, know that we don't work with them, we do work with them. And of course, we all know that much as they are mostly the perpetrators, but we also recognize their role as people who can prevent, who can promote women's rights, because we have men who have championed the cause of the women, who have men who have put out their voices to fight for the women's rights, who have men who have campaigned, who have men who have taken bold actions to really make sure that gender-based violence is addressed.
How can they be more effective from where they are?
They can be more effective by speaking out. You know, there has been a lot of discussion about men's silence, about their experiences. With regard to GBV, they actually say that when they go out to report, that they would be laughed at. And of course, that's not true. When you talk, the anger, the suffering that you have gone to some extent reduces, other than keeping it at bottles up, and of course you end up either hitting or maiming the person whom you have been angry with. The other action they can take is that men occupy very key positions in our land. They are the key policy makers, and therefore if they are legislators, they are the head teachers of the schools, they are the main police officers in the police force, and they are the main religious and cultural leaders. They have a very key role they can play because they have the space, they have the platforms, but they also have the power to prevent, to respond, to report, and to address GBV cases and violence against women. But for those who are also in positions of leadership and have, say, they are able to determine the budgets, they are able to determine resource allocation, it is important that they actually are responsive when it comes to planning and budgeting, so that more resources are allocated to addressing issues of GBV. For the parents, as men, they need to talk to their sons, they need to respect the women and the girls in their lives.
Someone is always watching.
Exactly. And for the men who happen to be head teachers, the children spend a lot of time in their custody. So they need to know that the girls and the boys who are in their custody need to be protected. We have been with the news in the papers about teachers who have defiled, who have sexually exploited the children that are in their care. And therefore, that is the role they can play.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Regina. What would you say to the men in the organization, in the workplace? Because, you know, we speak about the educators, we speak about those ones in government and other positions. What do we say to the men in the workplace?
To the men in the workplace, of course, like Regina said, they also need to be gender sensitive towards their female work colleagues, be respectful in the way they relate with them and in their conduct towards them, guard against what we call gender insensitive language.
What's gender insensitive language, for example?
Gender insensitive language is language that belittles or demeans a lady. It is sometimes sexist. And in most workplaces, men do it unconsciously. They do not know that what they are doing is wrong. For instance, making references to a female work colleague as sweetheart, sugar, you know, patting them on the back in places that are private, that is conduct that men need to be cautious of while at the workplace and while relating with their female colleagues.
Well, when we're talking about 16 days of activism, somebody said to me, but Josephine, you people, it seems you wake up at the end of November and then you go to sleep mid-December. Like, is it only in these 16 days that we hear so much, you know, happening in regards to gender-based violence, and yet we have a whole year? Why is it that it is these 16 days that are given this much priority?
Okay, thank you. Of course, the 16 days of activism aim at galvanizing the efforts, amplifying the voices of the actors, of the different categories of people who have been in the fight against GBV. Because like an organization like ours, ACFOD, 365 days, we are always talking about prevention of gender-based violence, because this is in line with our vision of making sure that there is gender equality in society. It is in line with our mandate of promoting women and girls' rights. And therefore, the 16 days of activism is like a climax of what people have been doing throughout the year. Call for action, galvanize action, amplify the voices, so that if there have been anybody sleeping, they wake up. If there are people who have not been that active, they wake up. But it's also a period for reflection. What is it that we have been doing that we need to do better? Who are those that we have not approached that we need to bring on board? And so this period is about calling on everyone, young, old, man, woman, boy, girl, to action. Okay. And the action is about you being accountable for your actions and inactions with regard to gender-based violence.
I was looking at the theme for this year, Orange the World, Count Me In. What does Orange the World mean?
Orange the World is that we come out. It's about coming out. It's about him, her, him and she, boy, girl, being accounted. being
participating in the process.
Participating in the campaign. It's actually a campaign. That you don't fold your arms. For example, when you see a girl being defiled, when you hear a woman being battered, you fold your hands and wait until she is maimed or killed, and you say, oh, you know, that family actually used to quarrel. I used to hear, what did you do about it? If you are a policy maker, what are those policies that you have put in place? They have not been implemented. What have you done about it? Have you kept quiet? Have you called upon your colleagues that have misused their power, their position, and have abused the women and girls' rights, and even other men's rights, and you have kept quiet? What is it that you need to do differently? So it's about really reflection on our actions and inactions with regard to GBV.
All right. Faith, you want to say something? Sandra, you want to say something in relation to that?
Basically, I wanted to say what she said, that it is about each and everyone getting on board with ending gender-based violence. Men, boys, girls, policymakers, police. What is it that you're doing as an individual? So that is what Orange the World means.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll be looking into what everybody as an individual should actually be doing to participate in the campaign to end gender-based violence. Let's take a short break. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Like I mentioned earlier, this particular conversation on gender-based violence is brought to you in collaboration with Trocare. And in the studio with me, I have Regina Bafaki, the Executive Director of Action for Development, ACFOD, and Sandra Nasali, who is the Program Coordinator, Knowledge Management, Advocacy, and Research at ACFOD as well. Before we took a break, you were speaking about the roles, and you were saying, what are you doing as an individual if you hear someone beating your neighbor, and what should they do? If this is my neighborhood and these are the sounds I hear all the time, or I know what's taking place, what do I do with that information?
First of all, you need to be awake. And awake, I mean to be mindful of the signs of violence. And so the moment you get to know that there is violence or there is GBV in a locality, the first thing you need to do is to open up. People have died because of the culture of silence we have about GBV. So as a responsible citizen, report.
Report to who? So your assumption is, I trust that my local council is going to do something about it. I trust that the law enforcers are going to do something about it. And we have trust issues for a good reason.
I know, but try. I'm sure you'd regret if someone died and did not act. So report to LC, report to police, have conversations about what is happening in people's lives with regard to violence. I was on a discussion with someone, and I told her that actually sometimes the violence happens in families and we just watch. So why don't you have candid discussion? If somebody is not willing to listen, get another person, second party, third party.
Do we have a toll-free line?
Yes, there are toll-free lines, and the toll-free line is for the Ministry of Gender.
I think that's the one for children, right?
Yes.
161?
Yes.
Even
Yes.
other NGOs
Other
have, like
NGOs.
Sedovip has a toll-free line for GBV victims, where they can call. Even FIDA, I think they do. They have a toll-free line.
Okay.
Yes.
What is important really is opening up,
I-
breaking the silence.
I guess the other issue is that people are afraid to call, because you call and report that this man is beating up his wife, and the wife comes for you the next day, you know, because she's afraid he might be taken in, and she has children to feed, and he's the breadwinner, and all of these things are happening. So you've destabilized, so to speak.
The challenge with the victims of violence or GBV is that sometimes there is ignorance, there is fear, there is stigma. But if you can build trust with the survivor or the victim of GBV, most probably he or she will confide in you and you report. But also what is important is that is there confidentiality. It is very, very important. That is a very key principle with regard to GBV. Confidentiality promotes trust. And therefore people will come to you and you are able maybe to help. But also, there are other structures that we can use. You have our religious leaders. People tend to respect them. We have clan leaders. People tend to respect them. So, and opinion leaders in our communities. So for you to be safer, if you fear for your life, try to talk to someone whom you think the other family or the other individuals in the conflict would respect, yeah.
Okay. So we know that GBV cuts across, that it's not just in homes, and it'll affect as many areas as we allow it to. So even the areas where we are trying to get more women to participate, for example, in politics, GBV also has an input there. What is happening in that space?
In that space, of course, women leaders are also experiencing different forms of gender-based violence at different levels. Some of them have been sexually harassed by their male counterparts, and you will find that during our capacity enhancement sessions, whenever we challenge them to push the women's agenda ahead, to lobby, they will say, you know, when we try to lobby in council, most of our male counterparts will promise to support us if we give them sexual favors. And of course, some of the violence they have experienced is physical. For instance, when they are campaigning, they are booed, some are beaten up. And another form of gender-based violence that they experience is emotional and
so
psychological.
The first two that you mentioned, they're beaten up, they're booed, that cuts across to the men as well, because that happens to them as well. What is unique to the women?
To the women, of course, society views women as the weaker sex. And some of the perceptions are we are not supposed to be in those spaces, leading, campaigning for direct seat positions under the parliament. So since they are looked at as the weaker sex, they are belittled, they are demeaned, and as a result, they are violated, their rights are abused.
What do our figures look like now for political participation as women?
Out of, let's say, the 400-something MPs that we have in Parliament, only 135, I think, are women. And when it comes to the direct seat, we only have 16 women MPs. And in the whole country, we have only 3 women serving as chairpersons at district level.
Wow. Wow, there's a lot of work to do there.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
What do you think about that, Regina?
Of course, it's very unfortunate. And I always say that out of the 40 plus millions we have, women are more than 51%. To have just 3 as chairpersons, that is very, very unfortunate. But it has to do with a lot of the systematic structural issues that women grapple with. They include the socialization that we have or have undergone, where society thinks that women cannot actually cannot lead. When it comes to a woman trying to contest for the direct seat, you know, they have been told, why are you encroaching on our space? You have yours. And the women's space they are talking about is the affirmative action. They think that women shouldn't actually contest beyond the affirmative seat. They should keep the direct for the men. But of course, the other challenge that the women grapple with is the commercialization of politics. The women do not have resources, and yet our politics has been monetized so much. And of course, if a woman ever gets through, and maybe she has been supported by, say, a godfather or a godmother, that person who has sponsored her campaign holds that woman hostage. It's her or his agenda that she will push. She must push.
Don't we have
failure to do that, to do that, of course, there will be insults, and they will be telling her that she won't actually get it come the next elections.
Blackmail.
Blackmail.
Don't we have organizations that support women in these spaces?
Yes, we have them. We have them. ACFOD is one of them. ACFOD is one of the organizations that have actually built the capacities of women who aspire to be leaders, and even when they have become leaders, we continue building their capacities for them to be effective, because we know that the space they occupy is challenging. The councils, the parliament they go to is male-dominated. The structures, the procedures are difficult. So as they try to circumvent, they are of course met with different challenges. And of course the women also have issues of multiple tasks that of course hinge or challenge their performance. And of course society expects a lot from the women. So because society expects a lot from the women, sometimes the women tend to overwork themselves in trying to prove that they are actually equal or even better than the male counterparts. And the other issue is that actually there is also spousal violence for the women leaders who are lucky to have spouses. There is spousal violence because sometimes when, for example, the man's position is not equal to the woman in terms of economics, the man tends to be violent. He actually thinks that the woman has now gone into politics and is now better, and the work at home, he thinks, has been relegated to either a domestic worker, and the men have, in most cases, been violent. We have instances where men, especially in the districts, where men would escort their wives when we are having trainings for the women. They are like, we want to see what you are teaching our women. Some would even come to ask, what is it that you got? The little allowance, the little transport refund, you share it. If you don't share it, that is...
You'll not be allowed to come for
you won't be allowed to enter, or if you enter, you are beaten.
Doesn't that cut across, though, to a lot of working women away from politics as well? I also feel that for top positions, you'll find that people then begin to say, look, you are neglecting your core role, you know. So it really cuts across, even away from politics.
Yeah,
Yes, it does.
Of course.
It does, but would like to also ask, where is it written that housework is a woman's core role? It is for, ideally it's supposed to be for everyone, the children, the men, the women in the home, to evenly participate in domestic work. It shouldn't be relegated to women alone in the home, or the girls in the home
So
alone.
gender-based violence is actually a socialization issue.
It is.
Yes,
It is.
It starts from way back.
At home.
At home.
Yeah. And actually, because of the heavy workload that the women have, it also sparks off violence, because the woman has been working. I've noticed and observed that in most rural areas, by the way, men spend a lot of their time on bars, playing cards, drinking, taking alcohol, while the women are busy. Those who are not in politics, maybe those who are not in the council, they are busy in the gardens. But when they go home, they will find work still waiting for them. What does the man want? He will expect to be served food and other things. And if the woman says, I'm tired, that is violence. So we are saying that, can we have actually men that are responsible? Can we have men that are gender responsive? We have worked with couples who were previously violent in our different programs. And when we worked with them, showed them the importance of supporting their wives, supporting their girl children and the boy children equally, the families have improved. And so we say it is possible. Even on socialization, socialization can change. If you were brought up as a girl that you are supposed to be the one doing housework, and the boy doesn't. If the boy grows up and he does the housework, what happens to him? Does he cease to be a man? No, he doesn't. He doesn't.
Where else are we finding challenges in ending GBV as ACFOD?
It's about attitude again. It's about attitude, it's about perceptions, and it's about silence. We have a lot of silence around the different forms of GBV. The other challenge is about the implementation of the laws that we have. We, as a country, have passed a number of laws that address GBV. We have the Domestic Violence Act, for example, that was passed in 2010. We have the National GBV of 2016. We have other laws that help us. We have the Children's Statute. All those laws, plus others, and the Constitution, of course, that helps us to respect and promote women and girls' rights. But when it comes to implementation, it's a challenge. You cannot believe that in our work, we've found that the law enforcers who happen to be the police officers, one, do not have knowledge about, not all of them, but some of them do not have knowledge about the existence of the Domestic Violence Act. They don't even know how it looks like. And yet, this is where women run to. This is where men are supposed to run to when they experience violence. This is what the local council courts are supposed to use.
Again, like I was telling you, you want us to go and report, but report to who? And I think this also points to issues of funding.
Yes.
But let's tackle that, get into that when we come back from this short break. Let's take a break. Once again, thank you for staying with us. And just a quick reminder, tonight's episode is done in partnership with Trocare. It's 2 days to mark the end of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And we're having a conversation round about that with, in the studio, Regina Bafaki, the Executive Director for Action for Development, and Sandra Nassali, also from Action for Development. What do you think is the biggest issue that if we are to, for all the years since 1991 that these conversations have been happening, you can point to and say, this is why we are not making the giant steps that we want to make?
The issues are, there are quite a number, but one of them is lack of resources. She talked about the different laws that we have, that government has passed, but when it comes to effective implementation, there is a gap. And the gap is because of limited resources. For instance, the police officer will know that, yes, it is okay to arrest a perpetrator of GBV, but they will not have the resources maybe to, you know, to drive to where the case has happened. Then the other issue is limited sensitization.
I was going to say ignorance.
Yeah, ignorance. Some people are perpetrators of GBV, but they do not know that what they are doing is wrong. We have had training, sensitization meetings where we have talked about wife battering, and we have seen men stand up and say, you know, I did not know it was wrong because I grew up seeing my father beating my mother. So there is limited sensitization. And of course, one of the biggest challenges we have had in our work is the negative culture practices. Culture has been a big deterrent when it comes to preventing gender-based violence. We have not been weaned off the negative culture practices. And when we talk about culture, we want for the viewers to know that there are some positive culture practices. For instance, like mutual respect, love, but there are negative ones, like female genital mutilation, early marriage, marrying off young girls. Those are negative culture practices. So culture has also been one of our biggest challenges in this, you know, in this work around.
You know, there's always been a conversation every time people speak about female genital mutilation, that then men also say, what of circumcision. You know? So there's different ways that people perceive these cultures. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, the one of circumcision and the female genital mutilation, we look at the damage. We look at the damage that is done to the human being. And for the male circumcision, I don't think there is any man who has come up to say that, for example, he has become dysfunctional because he has been circumcised. But for the girls who are, or women who have undergone female genital mutilation, they have had a lot of challenges, say in childbirth, in other ways. I even understand that they even become challenged when it comes to having sex with their males or their spouses or whatever.
Actually, that is the biggest effect of FGM on women.
Okay, so we know that gender-based violence really should be a shared role, that everybody has a role to play. What is the role of government? Because it keeps coming up. I know that there are bills that have not been passed for a while. Talk to me about that.
Yes, there are different roles that people need to play with regard to ending or addressing gender-based violence, and also depends on the power and the position that the person holds.
Let's start with the government.
For the government, having passed the laws, let them be effectively implemented, and the implementation comes with resourcing. We have been having campaigns to advocate for gender budgeting, and the gender budgeting is actually paying much attention to the unique needs of the men and women, including addressing gender-based violence. Recently, I was in Lamont, actually last week, I was in Lamont, and we were having an accountability forum on implementation of the GBV laws and policies. One of the issues that was raised by the police officers was that the whole district receives 100 liters. And this 100 liters for a whole month.
This is fuel.
Fuel. This is controlled by the CID office. But Lamont has so many sub-counties, and those sub-counties have officers who are supposed to follow up cases of GBV. So you can imagine the 100 liters being distributed to the different police officers. The other challenge was that, okay, even if we got the little fuel, the motorcycles are not running. So that is the resourcing, that's the facilitation we are talking about. Where is the goodwill to make sure that the laws that have been passed are actually effectively implemented? The other challenge is that the police officers that have been trained, whom we have been working with, like the Child and Family Protection Unit personnel, after a short time, they are transferred. You start afresh. So there's some of the challenges that, of course... It's
an endless cycle.
Yeah, it is an endless cycle. Of course, the other is about corruption. The other challenge is about corruption. That actually for those who are lucky and the women report to them the cases, they ask money to follow up the cases. And imagine, I've come to report, I don't have money, but you're still asking me, bring money to photocopy the police form 3. I go to the health center, I'm being asked money to be examined to establish
if I was
raped. And so, of course, all that leads to denial of access to justice, but also it hinders the level of addressing the GBV.
What is the role of employers?
Employers, of course, they can put in place policies, workplace policies, that protect both men and women from gender-based violence. They can have, for instance, a policy on sexual harassment, prevention and response, where the perpetrators are brought to book. And of course, they can also organize in-house. At ACFOD, we normally have in-house trainings on such things, on sexual harassment, on gender-based violence. Then they can also gender mainstream gender in their work.
Okay.
They can also make sure that there is there is creation of a safe space.
Safe space, yes.
Safe spaces where people can discuss, but also a person designated to listen to those issues. We may have a policy, but if there is no confidence, if there is no confidentiality, people will not report. And therefore, there at the workplace, employers must make sure there is somebody designated to receive. There should be a committee to review and discipline. But the other is that let each employee be a keeper of the other. Let's make sure that when you see signals, don't wait for someone to lose her job just because the boss demanded favors and they were denied. Let's
Or to
speak
lose
out.
his job
Or
because
to
the
lose
boss.
his job. It can be both.
It can be either way.
And for the religious leaders, this is something they can do within their sermons. And they are doing it, but we want them to do more. Let them not encourage women who have reported to them about the violence they are going through to tell them, to remind them of the vows they took.
Submission.
Submission, no. Let them be realistic that actually the vows you took are subject to how you are being treated. If you want to die, keep in that relationship. That's what I would do if I was a religious leader. Of course, I'm not.
The parents. We mentioned earlier that it begins at home. So
yes. For the parents, I think it is important that they have candid discussions with their children. Children need to know that they are bad and good touches right from the beginning. Teach your children the different parts of their bodies so that they know if someone is of bad intention, they will be able to know and to report. Try to have trust. Love your children so they are able to trust you, open up to you, and report. But for the parents also, let them live exemplarily. If you are a man who always quarrels with your wife when the children are listening, who slaps his wife when the children are watching, they will grow up thinking that is the norm. In their family, violence will have been normalized. When they grow up, they will continue because that's what they have observed. If you want to quarrel, if there's something you are not happy with, can you wait for your bedroom and go and talk when your children are not listening? But sometimes it is not possible.
I don't think our walls are that thick.
And if it has happened, and you realize that it was actually a mistake, you can mend the mistake. Apologize to your wife when the children are listening. Apologize to your wife, to your husband when the children are listening. So
I was looking at the faces of the people on camera, and I don't know how apologies go, but they seem like the easiest option. What would you like to say as a call to action to whoever is listening, Sandra?
What I would like to say to whoever is listening is we should not stand by and we let GBV happen in our communities. Let them report cases like Regina advised. Let them refer cases to maybe religious leaders, cultural leaders for counseling. Basically, they should do something. They should not just watch women being battered, young girls being defiled, and they do nothing about it. There are so many options. You can report to the police. You can seek counsel at a religious leader or at the religious institution. You can seek counsel from cultural leaders, clan leaders, and different elders that we have in the community.
What is the worst that can happen with gender-based violence?
The worst that can happen is to keep silent.
The effects of the silence.
The effect of the silence is, of course, there is agony, there is death, there is suffering, total suffering, and of course depression. There is depression, there is withdrawal, there is a performance impairment. There are so many effects that can happen as a result of GB. And of course it also affects the economic development of the family and the nation, because when I'm battered, I won't have time to go and work. And if I'm employed, of course, My employer may not understand why I always come either late or I am a withdrawn worker.
Well, there's a lot of sick leave.
Exactly. It might be as a result that I'm being beaten or harassed.
Oh, I'm depressed.
Or I'm
generally.
depressed. And therefore the effects are enormous. Yeah.
What would you give, same as Sandra has given her call to action to the viewers, and also the call to action that you have taken on as ACFOD? What would you like to say?
My call is that let's use this period of the 16 days of activism to amplify our voices. And amplifying the voices is not about us, those who may not be affected, but I'm talking about those who are even in the violence. Let's speak out. My appeal is also to the men. Come out, report. It does no harm. Report that you're actually being harassed. You're experiencing gender-based violence. You won't lose your manhood, you won't be less of a man because you have reported. It will help you because you will know what it means to report, because you will be helped, I'm sure. And then for the media people, my appeal is that please report, get out of your way to report, and report positively.
About women, yes.
Yes,
Positive
about
portrayal.
women, about women, report positively, and form groups amongst yourselves to be champions of gender-based violence. Don't wait for us, your customers, to come. No, form groups and be champions of gender-based violence. To the school authorities, please, please, please remember, our children are in your custody. Protect them, and if there is any of you that is doing it, please stop it, because the community is watching and you won't like what people will do, because sometimes it becomes too much, especially when you rape or defile a child that has been in your custody. They were not sent to your school to be defiled. They were sent to be taught.
Do you think that the punishments meted out to the perpetrators of gender-based violence are what they should be? Or are these punishments also enabling a bad situation?
The punishments, to me, they are not enough.
Because you know you're going to report and then...
Exactly. The punishments are not enough. We need to tighten the punishments, but also I think what is important is that the perpetrators need to be met and discussed with, because sometimes, as Sandra said,
They
don't know.
They're doing this wrong.
So when you give a punitive measure, it may not work. So we need to combine both. Talk to them and punish them. And I think if they are to be given a punishment, let it be a harsh one, because some of them are doing it with impunity. And lastly, what I want to say is that everybody deserves to be respected. Every woman and a girl deserve dignity. Yes.
I was going to bring in the issues of mental health, because I think that can actually be a factor that comes into play, especially when you tell me that somebody might not know that what they're doing is wrong when they're beating someone to their death.
Yes.
But I hear you, you've wrapped it up pretty nicely. Thank you so much, Sandra Nasali, for coming to the show, and thank you very much, Regina Bafaki, for taking the time to speak with us. Well, that brings us to the end of our show for tonight. Thank you for watching. Coming up is NTV Weekend Edition.